Red Bull in meltdown. Max Verstappen's future hanging by a thread after Bahrain disaster. Following the catastrophic result at the Bahrain Grand Prix, Red Bull Racing didn't waste a second. An emergency internal meeting was reportedly held behind closed doors, and what has begun to leak out from that gathering is nothing short of alarming. Max Verstappen, the face of their recent dominance, may be closer than ever to walking away from the team that made him a legend. The Dutch driver, a four-time world champion, is said to be on the verge of activating a specific clause in his contract, an escape hatch that could allow him to leave the team well before his current deal ends in 2028. The truth? With the current level of dysfunction bubbling inside Red Bull's walls, that exit could happen sooner rather than later. And if Verstappen goes, it won't be long before the biggest names on the grid come knocking. Mercedes and Aston Martin, in particular, are believed to be circling like vultures, carefully monitoring the unraveling of what once seemed like an unbreakable dynasty. But that leads us to a crucial question. Would Max actually abandon the very team that helped him conquer the sport in historic fashion? And if he does, who could realistically handle the magnitude of his talent, his relentless drive to win, and the political whirlwind that follows him? The reality is harsh and undeniable. Red Bull is unraveling. Whether fans want to admit it or not, the team is spiraling downward. And it didn't start in Bahrain. The storm has been brewing for months, maybe even years. Key technical minds have vanished. Adrian Newey, gone. Rob Marshall, out. Jonathan Wheatley, missing in action. Even Honda, who quietly faded into the background, has signaled their growing distance from the project. Bahrain just laid it all bare. Verstappen's sixth-place finish in Sakir wasn't just a fluke or a bad weekend. It was a wake-up call. He was only saved from an even worse result by a timely safety car. The car's braking was inconsistent, the setup never clicked, and after a full weekend of adjustments and desperate fixes, it still wasn't drivable in the way he needed it to be. Max's frustration has turned into open discontent. The spark that once fueled his domination is now being consumed by internal doubts and bitter disappointment. That's what prompted the high-level meeting, because there were two fires that needed immediate attention: the technical failings of the RB20 and the explosive situation surrounding Verstappen's potential departure. And here's the part that should send shivers through Red Bull HQ. Insiders have confirmed that if Max falls below third in the driver's standings, he is legally entitled to pull the plug on his contract. At the time of writing, he's just 6 points ahead of George Russell. If that gap closes, the escape clause becomes a real and present threat. To make matters worse, the internal atmosphere has reached boiling point. Sky Sports' Ted Kravitz broke a story that has everyone talking. Max's manager, Raymond Vermeulen, stormed into the Red Bull garage after the Bahrain race and unloaded on Helmut Marko in a verbal tirade. This wasn't a private chat. It wasn't handled quietly. According to Kravitz, it was a public scolding, a full-blown dressing down in front of stunned team personnel. Witnesses described the scene as surreal. Vermeulen, reportedly furious, ripped into Marko with brutal directness. The veteran advisor stood silently, absorbing the criticism like a student being punished by a furious teacher. And when it was over, Vermeulen simply turned and left, leaving behind a garage full of dropped jaws and stunned silence. Even Max's helmet, left behind in the chaos, became a symbol of the moment. Something important was left behind, something final. This wasn't just a tantrum. It wasn't a personal grudge. It was the kind of behind-the-scenes confrontation that fractures teams, breaks trust, and changes the course of careers. Red Bull may still have the branding, the trophies, and the mythos, but right now they don't have cohesion. They don't have internal peace. And in Formula One, where unity is everything, that can cost you titles. It can cost you your star driver. Max Verstappen's story at Red Bull is teetering on the edge of a dark turning point. The bond is weakening. His post-race interview with Dutch media told the story with eerie clarity. When asked if he had debriefed with the team about the car's issues, he rolled his eyes and dismissed the question. "I don't even feel like talking about it right now," he said. Not exactly the words of a man who feels heard, supported, or satisfied. And that leads us to the question everyone is too afraid to ask out loud. How much longer is Max willing to tolerate this? How much longer before he decides that staying loyal to Red Bull is a greater risk than walking away? Because from where we're standing, the answer may already be forming in his mind. And if that door closes, Red Bull may never open it again. Right now, with Helmut Marko still standing as Max Verstappen's most powerful ally within the Red Bull hierarchy, there's little doubt that whatever message he delivered during that emergency meeting with Hannah Schmitz and Paul Monahan was packed with urgency, frustration, and a growing sense of dread. But here's the harsh reality. Red Bull is standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering dangerously close to losing the very driver who defined their recent era of dominance. And no, this isn't some baseless rumor cooked up by tabloids to stir controversy. This is a real and looming threat that has sent shockwaves through the paddock. In the immediate aftermath of the Bahrain Grand Prix, reporters wasted no time grilling Helmut Marko about Verstappen's potential departure. The tension was thick, the answers evasive. While some critics were quick to slap the ungrateful or disloyal label on Max, accusing him of turning his back on the very team that helped shape him into a four-time world champion, a more honest look at the situation reveals something deeper and far more complex. Championships in Formula One are not handed out like candy. They're forged through relentless effort, consistency, and maintaining an elite standard across every facet of the operation. Once a driver has lived at that rarefied altitude, where every detail is tuned to perfection and every race is a potential victory, anything less feels like crashing into a void. So can you really blame Max or his manager, Raymond Vermeulen, for scanning the horizon and wondering if excellence might now exist elsewhere? Sure, Red Bull the brand will continue. The logo will still be slapped onto cars. The trucks will still roll up to paddocks around the world. But without Verstappen behind the wheel, good luck keeping that car consistently in the top four, let alone at the front. And that's exactly why the internal panic alarms have been blaring ever since that catastrophic Bahrain weekend unraveled so brutally. Helmut Marko, as he's always been, remains the loudest voice demanding accountability and immediate answers. He was blunt in his assessment. The team needs to claw its way back to form, and fast. When you're no longer fielding the fastest car on the grid, everything else needs to be flawless. Pit stops, race strategy, tire management, they all have to operate at a world-class level. And right now, none of it is. That's unacceptable. But perhaps the most concerning part of Red Bull's crisis is how eerily familiar it sounds. The root of the problem appears to be a troubling mismatch between wind tunnel data and on-track performance. Christian Horner admitted as much. What their simulations are predicting at the Milton Keynes factory simply doesn't match what's happening during race weekends. The tools are lying to us, he said bluntly. The wind tunnel tells one story, but the car tells another when it hits the tarmac. This should ring alarm bells. Because just a few years ago, Mercedes found themselves trapped in this exact same vortex, chasing phantom performance, misled by corrupted wind tunnel readings and simulations that didn't hold up under pressure. It took them years to realign those two worlds. Now look where they are, solidly second in the pecking order, slowly but steadily closing the gap to the top. And whisper it quietly, but Mercedes has positioned itself rather neatly as a potential landing spot should Max decide to pull the plug on Red Bull. That scenario no longer seems far-fetched. The internal frustration at Red Bull has reached a boiling point. And quite frankly, it's justified. One glance back at where they were this time last year paints a staggering picture. In Bahrain 2024, Verstappen annihilated the field, crossing the finish line 22 seconds ahead of the nearest challenger. Fast forward to 2025, and the same driver, in the same colors, barely scraped into the top six, and only thanks to a lucky safety car intervention. That's not a slump. That's a nosedive. Red Bull's decline has been swift and steep, and if they don't start finding solutions, fast, they may lose more than lap time. They may lose the one man who made them untouchable. Verstappen ended the Bahrain 2025 race in 6th place, trailing the winner by 34 seconds. Once again, it was only the stroke of fortune from a safety car that saved them from further embarrassment. And here's the kicker. That's nearly a full minute slower than what Max managed on the same circuit just 1 year ago. This wasn't due to some catastrophic mechanical failure. There was no engine blowout, no DRS issue, no suspension collapse. The brutal truth is much simpler, and much scarier. The car was just slow. Plain and simple. Red Bull have built a machine that lacks bite, grip, and pace. And the gap to the front runners is no longer hypothetical. It's visible, it's growing, and it's becoming harder to ignore. To make matters worse, Red Bull's decision to pass over Liam Lawson may have been hasty, but in the grand scheme of things, that's far from their most pressing concern. The real problem isn't about future prospects, it's about their present unraveling in real time. So now we return to that emergency meeting, that gathering behind closed doors. Marco, Schmitz, Monahan, all desperately trying to find a path back to stability. But it may be too late. Because once a driver like Max Verstappen begins to question the project, begins to wonder if the house he built is starting to rot, the end is often inevitable. Red Bull is no longer just fighting for performance. They're fighting for survival at the very top. And without their champion, the fall from grace could be swift and merciless. Right now, all eyes in the Formula One world are locked on Max Verstappen. After the Bahrain Grand Prix, reporters wasted no time pressing him on Red Bull's promises to bring performance upgrades to the car. And while Max maintained his composure in front of the cameras, the subtle shift in his tone when speaking about the near future didn't go unnoticed. There was no fiery outburst, no public tantrum, but the message underneath his words was unmistakable. "I don't want to hear about what's coming or how important it's supposed to be," he said calmly. "I just want to show up and see what it's actually worth." Every word dripped with contained irritation, the kind of quiet fury that says more than a shouting match ever could. The pressure is intensifying with each passing race weekend, and unless Red Bull drastically turns the tide before Imola, or at the absolute latest, by the time they reach Barcelona, the situation could spiral into brutally honest internal talks that no one will be able to sugarcoat. Teams across the paddock are counting down the days to the Spanish Grand Prix, which has become the unofficial deadline for a major round of technical upgrades. The hope is that this sweeping development package will offer salvation, not just for Red Bull, but also for rivals like McLaren and Aston Martin. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Red Bull isn't even the second fastest team anymore. The window to recover is narrowing by the day. Dutch journalist Eric van Haren summed up the tension best when he described how close Verstappen came to completely losing his temper in Bahrain. Throughout the weekend, Van Haren noted, the Red Bull garage, led by Christian Horner, was visibly rattled. You could hear the strain in Horner's voice, see the anxiety behind the usual corporate smiles. The team should count themselves lucky that Max kept quiet, Van Haren wrote. Because if he had really opened up, the criticism would have been deafening. And this is where things get truly fascinating. When you have a driver as driven, as ruthlessly ambitious, and as publicly agitated as Max Verstappen, it becomes nearly impossible to ignore the looming possibility of an exit. And one potential destination continues to dominate the whispers: Mercedes. Yes, Toto Wolff has publicly backed his current driver lineup. But let's not forget, he once passed on signing Verstappen earlier in the Dutchman's career. If Max becomes a free agent again, no one seriously believes Wolff would let the opportunity slip twice. If Verstappen hits the market, you can bet Mercedes would throw everything at making the deal happen, even if it means reshuffling their entire roster ahead of the seismic regulation changes coming in 2026. Some fans insist Verstappen should wait and see how the new car rules shake out before making such a drastic move. But recent moves, such as Lewis Hamilton's shocking switch to Ferrari, suggest one uncomfortable truth. These drivers often have access to information the rest of us don't. They see things we don't. They hear whispers in meetings we'll never attend. Even Martin Brundle weighed in on the potential Verstappen to Mercedes scenario during Sky F1 coverage, and he didn't hold back. "If Max comes onto the market, George should be worried," Brundle said. "Because while George is doing a fantastic job leading that team right now, Toto missed the chance to sign Max once before, and I really don't think he'd let that happen again." With every race, Verstappen's patience seems to thin. What once felt unshakable, the bond between Red Bull and their most prized asset, now appears to be weakening. And so the question grows louder: are we witnessing the beginning of the end for Max Verstappen at Red Bull? Could he really walk away from the very team that helped etch his name into the history books, simply because they're no longer capable of giving him what he needs to stay at the top? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And when you're done, make sure to click the video on your screen for even more behind-the-scenes drama and breaking F1 analysis. The story of Max Verstappen's future is just beginning, and the next chapter could change everything.